Ready?
Please.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us on this 2-week certificate orientation cum faculty development program. Today is the second lecture in our 2-week series. We are really honored and very excited to host a program that is quite unconventional and offered in collaboration with one of the premier institutions, Jawaharlal Nehru University. The Orientation cum Faculty Development Program is organized by School of Liberal Education, BLOCK-Galgotias University, in collaboration with Monnet project, Jawaharlal Nehru University. My name is Dr. Manasi Sinha, Associate Professor in School of Liberal Education. And I'm really happy to have with us today Ambassador Jitendra Misra, Adjunct Professor and Distinguished Fellow, Jindal School of International Affairs, OP Jindal Global University, Solipat, India. By way of introduction, Ambassador Jitendra Misra has an illustrious teaching career, having taught in Jamia Millia Islamia in New Delhi, University of Lisbon in Portugal, Vietnam National University in Vietnam, and Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. He has immensely contributed in training Indian diplomats of foreign services training institution. Apart from teaching, he has also contributed to academic research through publications in renowned academic journals. As a public intellectual, he has been part of debates and discussions on BBC World, CNN News 18, Times Now, to name a few. Ambassador Misra is an alumnus of Jawaharlal Nehru University, from where he has completed his PhD. He started his career as an Indian diplomat, serving as an ambassador in Portugal, Laos, and Vietnam. Today, he is going to speak on the paradoxes of India-UK relations. The India-UK relationship is riddled with paradoxes. Britain's celebration of empire is pitted against Indian claims of red relations. As the former imperial power, Britain claims the right to make interventions in India's domestic politics, but India objects. Britain claims a special relationship with India, but India doesn't view it as such. Over 1 billion doses of UK's Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was manufactured in India as Covishield. Yet, Britain refused to grant certification to the Covishield vaccine. Britain wants market access in India, while India wants access to Britain's labor market, increases in agricultural exports and cutting-edge technologies. China's rise is less concerning to Britain than to India. Russia is the EU's most acute threat, but remains a valuable strategic partner for India. India prioritizes the Indo-Pacific and Quad, but Britain prioritizes the Anglosphere. India seeks United Nations Security Council reforms, but Britain doesn't. A final paradox lies in the gap in power, particularly in terms of per capita GDP between India and UK. Both India and the UK, being major countries, could help address such paradoxes. Therefore, today we are going to learn more about this paradox between India and UK and the ways this paradox will be resolved. We are delighted to have you with us, sir, and really looking forward to listening to your informative talk. Just a quick note for all before we hand it over to sir. We'll open the floor for discussion after the lecture and we'll pick up your questions. For online participants, please do feel free to post your questions or comments in the chat function. We'll post them to sir accordingly. Also, we are live streaming the lectures too and will be available on the YouTube channel, which will be shared with you shortly. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. Now, with that introduction, I'll turn it over to you to get us started. Looking forward to the document. Thank you so much. Yes.
This camera is
it cannot come here.
Yes.
Because all it's fine. That's fine. So I'll have to just put that on the stand if you put.
Yeah, it's not fine.
I need. You don't have a stand?
No, because we have the issue with the back screen.
No, the mic.
No, you can.
No,
It should not the
on the
stand.
stand.
No, we don't have it.
Oh.
We can use it here. We can place camera here.
Otherwise I'll have to hold it all.
Yeah, I can. No. Yes, I can come. You can come. Yes, yes.
So then how will you? Yeah, that will be easier.
Yes.
Just see that it's coming. Is it all right?
Yes,
Yeah.
fine.
That's nice. Can you hear me? Am I clear? Am I loud enough? Right. Well, thank you very much, Professor Sinha, for that generous introduction. And you already said it all. I don't think I have much to add in terms of content, but I'll tell you a set of stories. And I'm glad I wrote that abstract. You asked me to write that because that's clarified the paradoxes that, according to me, are the paradoxes of this relationship. So I'm going to give you a slightly disruptive analysis as I see it as a practitioner who worked in London. It's not based on fantasy. But first I'd like to apologize for the delay. I was here at 11 o'clock at the appointed time, and we were supposed to start at 11:30, but then, there were lots of welcomes, and there was a lot of Santa Claus showed up with gifts and a lot of good food and a lot of hospitality, which is great. But I think you have become a little bit more hungry in the process. So bear with me. Now I was given an hour and a half, but do you still want me to take an hour and a half? 45 minutes, I will bore you with provocative words, if not deeds. And 45 minutes, you will tear me apart and do that. So it's great to talk to young people. And why I want to make it provocative is because I'm no longer in the government. I'm very cautious about what I say even today by training, but I have just that little bit of space to express myself more freely as I do on television also. That's why BBC doesn't call me anymore because I was quite critical of when they said that India is being neutral on Ukraine. I said, you're kidding. That's the creation of the media. We are not neutral. Our policy has actually evolved on Ukraine, but that's a different story. The BBC is as biased as anybody else. Everybody has a point of view in the world. Nobody is without bias, not even when they claim to be factual, because the facts that they employ, are very selectively determined to project a certain point of view, a certain kind of discourse. You all are very young, and I tell young people this all the time. The world is never as it appears to be, never. The world is as it is. And the great man V.S. Naipaul, Nobel laureate, said in his novel, A Bend in the River. The world is as it is, and these are the little men, and then blah, blah, blah. And then he introduces one of the main characters of the novel. Wow. So I'm going to be a little bit provocative. It's a complicated history, India and the UK. And even today, the way the British view their encounter with India and the way India views our encounter with Britain are diametrically opposed. Though there are voices in Britain that are now willing to look at history in a different way from what the British have been used to. I will not go into the paradoxes, which Professor Sinha has already mentioned. I had a sheet of paper on that, but I'm going to try and explain those paradoxes. And I'm trying to start a chain of thinking in your minds about those paradoxes, because the relationship is never what it appears to be. That's why the Indo-British Chamber of Commerce, I told them, you calling me and your ambassador will be there, and I'm not going to say very good things about Britain. So I said, please excuse me. I'm a diplomat, so I don't want to be undiplomatic, but I don't think I'm going to be able to tailor-made to sanitize my remarks to please people, because that's not how it is as I see it. So Gordon Brown, when he was the prime minister, he said, the British are very serenely self-righteous. They feel, oh yeah, empire, yeah, we were there. But when I look at the Tower of London, or look at Parliament House, it's all built on the loot of India. When I look at Maharaja Ranjit Singh's throne, and I have seen it in the Victoria and Albert Museum, I almost started crying. Why is Maharaja Ranjit Singh's throne sitting in the Victoria and Albert Museum as an item of display? It should be in the sacred chambers of the successors of Ranjit Singh in India. Why are the Elgin marbles of Greece, why are they in, just as you enter the British Museum, I don't know how many of you have traveled there. It defies logic. And the British are very serenely self-righteous about, oh, we are right. Their leaders fail to address the negative effects of colonial rule. Schools, there is a lot of rewriting of history going on in the world, in India, and some claim that we are trying to black out certain parts of our history that are not very palatable to our present leadership in India. rightly or wrongly. I'm not going to take a view on that because every history is a biased project. There is no history that's not biased. When the Somnath temple, for example, I mean, I'm going into a very painful subject, was desecrated and destroyed by Mahmud of Ghazni. Amir Khusro, whom we lionize as a great Sufi, the peaceful leader, read what he wrote about it. He went ballistic with happiness at the destruction of the Hindus and their history and their memory and their sacred spaces. But that's history. Now, you can't say that that did not happen, but can you say that because it happened, we have to turn our history upside down to demonize what happened? You can't do that also. You have to reach a kind of an equilibrium because history is a project to understand what we are, a study of the past to understand the present, and to build a future that is sane for us. That's what history is. So no history is unbiased. So the British schools, they have blanked out colonial history. My children studied in Dame Alice Owen School in Potters Bar, North London. And I saw the school's curriculum. History for them begins with Greece and Rome, with a little bit of courtesy to the ancient Egyptians, to the pharaonic Egypt, a little bit of Egypt. Civilization begins with Greece and Rome. There is nothing about the loot of India, about the desecration of India that happened in 200 years of colonialism. Nothing. They do not teach that. And my children who studied abroad most of their lives, they only now they are trying to understand what India is about because they never had the chance to study India, what really happened to India and Indians. So I asked the British, why aren't you writing your history in a way that acknowledges what you did to Indians? But they won't do that because they are very smart. A YouGov survey. YouGov is a British, polling research agency. 59% of Britons, including a lot of young people like you, who have no experience of empire, only heard about it, feel that they feel great pride in the empire. Only 19% felt ashamed about the empire. This is a survey in 2014. And 23% said, we don't know, we don't care. Oh, I don't care. That kind of thing, like young people, oh, I don't care, whatever it is, whatever. So, British Prime Minister Cameron comes to India and he serenely says, somebody asks him, he goes to Amritsar to show respect to the dead at Jallianwala Bagh, the massacre, the great massacre. How many of you know about Jallianwala Bagh? Raise your hands. Almost everybody. I'm so relieved that at least you know your history. Because if you don't know your history, you are nothing. History is the mother of the mother of the mother of all disciplines. It's the great grandmother of knowledge. So, what happened? David Cameron, the Prime Minister of Britain, goes to Jallianwala Bagh. He writes something, he expresses sorrow, but no remorse, no apology, only sorrow. And he was asked, are you going to apologize, Prime Minister, to Indians for what your forefathers did in Jallianwala Bagh? No, I'm not going to apologize. We have to learn from it and move on. And then he says, quote, there is an enormous amount to be proud of in what the British Empire did. Gordon Brown said the days of the British having to apologize for colonial history are over. Gordon Brown when he was the Prime Minister. So this is the way their leadership looks at India. The Churchill statue was vandalized in Trafalgar Square. I have been to Trafalgar Square a million times when I lived in London in 2001 to 2004. Now, Churchill is, he's revered as a great British hero, and he was a great British hero for the British people. during the war. He was a great war leader. I wish, he was like Lal Bahadur Shastri of India. To me, Shastriji was the greatest war leader, even more than Indira Gandhi. And he never got his due. 1965. Now, Churchill was a great war leader, but Churchill also said, I hate the Indians. They have a beastly religion. We poor Hindus, we are lesser beings. Islam was more familiar to them because it's part of the Judeo-Christian heritage, but not Hinduism. These people have a beastly religion. They are a beastly people. The Bengal famine, 3 million people died. 3 million people died. In the Odisha famine that you don't know about, where I come from, 1 million people died in 1869 because the grain was there, but the grain was needed for the war effort. And in 1869, it was horrible mismanagement. Not even 100 people died of famine after independence. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Understand the history, understand the facts, make the comparison. So, Shashi Tharoor, author of An Era of Darkness, Inglorious Empire is the title, a British edition. I think it's come out by, one of the great publishers. He writes, he calls for reparations. And the great Utsa Patnaik of JNU wrote a paper in Columbia University Press, published by Columbia University Press as part of a book chapter. $45 trillion is what the British owe us as reparation for their loot of India between 1765 and 1938. That's a lot of money. But the British saying, she must be kidding. So how do you bridge this gap? This is the greatest paradox. History is the greatest paradox of our ties with Britain. And the British must not try and whitewash history if we are to have proper, modern, future-looking relations. But I think it will happen. The time is coming. Investment relationship with India, is for an example of that. So, Dr. Jaishankar, whom I am one of his fans. I know him very well because he's my colleague, external affairs minister. He's a great minister. He's very cerebral, he's very smart, and he is very strong in his public advocacy of Indian causes. He called in a meeting in the Atlantic Council, go to YouTube, Google him, Dr. Jaishankar, Atlantic Council, US. British rule was predatory and British rule was 2 centuries of humiliation. He said, we talk about 1 century of humiliation with regard to another country. He didn't name it, that country is China. The Chinese are talking forever about a century of humiliation. So these Westerners cannot lecture to us. But in India, we don't have the pride. We don't talk about 2 centuries of humiliation. We were devastated. The Chinese were not destroyed. They had imperialism, but not colonialism. Right? There's a different thing. So Dr. Jaishankar has, as the serving foreign minister of India, Subramaniam Jaishankar says the British rule is predatory and it's 2 centuries of humiliation. But that's a big statement. How come nobody talks about it in India? The press doesn't emphasize it enough because our minds are colonized. For me, language is a tool. Sanskrit was never spoken by the majority of Indians. For them, it was foreign, but it was the language of the literati. During the Mughal period, the high culture of the Mughals came from Persia, Persian culture. Persian became the language. Persian is not an Indian language, but it was the court language. That's okay. So English became the court language, but English is as Indian as anything else today. So we don't need to be apologetic. It's a tool, right? So when Dr. Jaishankar says that, I as a former ambassador, I as a practitioner, ask myself, my foreign minister has said it publicly. So this is huge. And I want to make that point. It's huge because this will be the precursor for demands for reparations and other things and return of heritage, such as Maharaja Ranjit Singh's throne, such as the Kohinoor diamond, which was taken by Nadir Shah to Persia, the looter, and then by the British, and it adorns the crown jewels that the British Queen wears on her head. Right. Okay, darling, it's all right, it doesn't matter. So, what I'm trying to say is, we need to understand our history. We need to acknowledge it. We need to respect it, but we also need to move on. I say that in the context of the politics of our country today. Move on, but accept the truth. Do not whitewash the truth. But that becomes the basis for reconciliation with Britain or with anybody else. So, there will be a policy challenge, I think, in the next 20 years for sure, to Britain. And I will relate that to India's growing power and Britain's declining power, relative, in the global order. How many of you are doing foreign affairs? Nobody. I wish some of you are doing. I mean, you start a course and ask me to come and teach here. I'll do that. I'd love to.
Political science.
Yeah, as part of that. So there are legal hurdles, so we are not pursuing return of heritage, but there will be challenges. Okay, I'd like to ask the British, okay, fine, you did not destroy India's economy. Okay, you claim you did not destroy things. Okay, fine. You claim that this $45 trillion of reparations scientifically calculated by a renowned economist called Utsa Patnaik. You say that this is a bogus figure. Okay, I accept that. But can you say that human development indicators during the time you ruled India and now can be contested? No, nobody is going to contest. They don't contest the human development indicator. So I am telling you a then and now analysis. 15 minutes I've been talking, another half an hour. Please bear with me. But I'm going to make it very interesting for you. You bet. So you know what happened? Okay, then and now, before and after, as they say, fat and thin. So in 1951, right? Just 4 years after the British left India, life expectancy in India was 37.2% for males. Shock, shock, shock. An average Indian lived 37.2, and an average woman 36.2. Because a lot of women died because they are fertile, they give birth, so they die. There's no Medicare. Today, not today, in 2 years ago, it was 70. Okay, from 36 to 70. Now, can any British economist challenge that? Can any British economist challenge the great research of the great British economist of Cambridge, Angus Madison, who said that for most of human history, India's contribution to the world's GDP was 25%. At independence, it was 2-point-something%. So what happened to your production? Where did the money go? It went somewhere, the crown jewels. You can reach conclusions by inference. It's very simple. It has to be used somewhere. India cannot be unproductive suddenly from 25%. You can't go to 2%. Today, it's more than 7%, some recovery. So, literacy rates increased from 18.33% in 1951. I'm taking 1951 because I'm using Indian figures, because the British never published such figures, because they would have been very, very embarrassed. They never published figures. We published because we had the census in 1951. We've had an excellent census, door to door. So these are Indian government figures after independence, but it's pretty close to independence. That's why it's a benchmark. 18.33% literacy in 1951, and in 2011, when the last census of India is public, because of COVID, we didn't have one in 2021. But 2011, 82% for males and 65% for women. Now, how many of you see the proportion? More men than women, right here. There's something wrong, right? We need to fix it. Why should less women be having access to higher education than men? But that's the figure. 82% literacy for men, 65% for women. That's not plain right, it's plain wrong. But the comparison shows with the British that it's very telling. Defense expenditure was, you know what? Oh, the Indians, they took the decisions on who Indians will fight, where they will fight. I believe 6 to 8 million Indian soldiers died in the First World War to causes that had nothing to do with the defense of India or of Indians. It was the defense of the imperial power. When I go to El Alamein in Egypt, I speak Arabic. I've been there many times. When I went to Benghazi in Libya, the so-called Commonwealth Cemetery, Om Namah Shivaya, or something about Allah, or something about Christ, and the name of the Indian boy who dies, it drove me to tears. A young boy, and even now I feel emotional. They died for no reason, for somebody else's war. Your defense expenditure is $12 million in 1947. Can you believe it? Because of the defense of India was not the defense of India. It was the defense of Britain. It was just the money of India employed for the defense of Britain. And today our defense expenditure last year was 76.6 billion US dollars. Now, I have all the footnotes, ma'am, because this is the subject of my paper that I'm publishing in Vietnam, but I can share them with you later. Everything is properly researched. I'm not making it all up. Nothing. 3 million people die in the Bengal famine. 1/3 of the population of Orissa is decimated, 1 million. And there are so many famines in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, elsewhere. As our great Nobel laureate Amartya Sen said, a democratic India is the best chance for India to escape from famines because we have a free press. If somebody is dying somewhere, the media will write about it, the government will know, and the government will act, otherwise it will fall. Democracy is an opportunity, right? It's a chance for us to get better. So, am I abusing the British? Do I sound like I'm abusing them? That everything about them is bad? They're awful, horrible, nasty? Yes or no? No? Yes? I hope not, because I'm going to come to something positive now. Because if there was one Briton here, he would have said, oh my God, what a relief. I have taken this nonsense from this fellow for so long. So you know what? Now I come to the good story. What's a good story? It's the beginning of a good story. And every good story begins with the bad part. It's all relative, right? It is a relationship that's challenged, and that's why there is called a strategic review. The first strategic review in March 2021 in Britain after the end of the Cold War. This is a great review. Read this document. It's called Global Britain in a Competitive Age. It's free to access. Go government.uk, right? Website. It's a great review. We Indians, we don't think strategically enough. We don't think in 50, 100 years, what are we going to be like? What are you going to be like when you become grandparents? For example, what am I going to be like when I'm 90 and if I'm still around? How is my India going to be like? Will I be alive for the centenary of independence? God, I hope I am. Probably not. If I'm alive, I'll be about 95, but yeah, if I'm going well, yeah, why not? I mean, I am the product of the improvement in healthcare in my country, because this is an endowment from India's leadership to the people of India. I want you to think that way, the Indian way, as Dr. Jaishankar said in his book, the Indian way, the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata has everything about human knowledge. Take it out of its connection with Hindus, dealing that, right? Don't think of it as a series of stories. It's a great story. It's the greatest story ever told. It's so complex about human development, how humans think and act, what drives them to do things. So, the review called Global Britain in a Competitive Age, released on March 16, 2021, a section on the integrated review of security, defense, development, and foreign policy. Talks about India, among other countries. Quote unquote, an international actor of growing importance, which India is. We want to, quote unquote, transform the relationship with India. That's what I mean. We have to transform this. And to transform this relationship, we have to also think about a new kind of relationship, not based on the colonial history and the perceptions thereof. Right. The review states that the investment relationship with India supports 500,000 jobs in India and 500,000 jobs in Britain. It's quite significant. And India is Britain's second largest research partner. They stole all our knowledge during colonial rule. All our sacred texts, all our great bodies of work, knowledge, were employed for the use of empire. But there were also British historians, British archaeologists, great people who actually revived the great ancient and medieval knowledge of India. You know, that's also true. So it's a very complicated history. So the UK-India relationship is already strong, the review says, but in the next 10 years, we seek transformation in our cooperation across the full range of our shared interests. That's exactly what it says, the review says. Now, what are these shared interests? Okay, fine. Do we have shared interests? I'm not so sure. We belong to different geographical spaces and different strategic orientations. Why? China. The British, we spoke about that in the paradoxes map. The British are much less concerned about China than we are. China is an existential threat to India because it is a direct threat to the territorial integrity of this nation. Pakistan is an existential threat. Britain is not an existential threat, but for them, China is a different cup of tea. It's a state-based threat. They want to build China-facing capabilities. China's military modernization and assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific, etc., they are talking about as a risk to UK interests. For us, it's not a risk. They are breathing down our necks. They are sitting on territory they captured in 2020. They refuse to move out. But we have given them a good fight so far. After the initial surprise, we are the only country that can hold its own against China to some extent. Proven on the ground. But they are much stronger They have much more by way of resources to deploy if push comes to shove. Now, for us, China is an acute threat. If there's one, I'm using the same phrase. For them, it is a partner also. That it is a rival, but we can work with that rival. We seek to engage with China at multiple levels like trade, investment, climate change. That's what the review says. So compete and counteract China where necessary and cooperate where possible. It's very different from India's view of China. India's view of Russia, their most acute threat, quote unquote, in the review is Russia. For us, Russia is a genuine, a strong strategic partner. There are some questions now about the relationship, but that's different because of China. So then what about UN Security Council reforms? Quad. As I said, as Man said, their focus is on the Anglosphere, ours is on Quad and the Indo-Pacific. Then UN Security Council reforms. We want reforms to include India as a permanent member of the UN Security Council with the same rights and privileges as the P5. But Britain will never want that. No British ambassador, no P5 ambassador made a statement on the floor of the UN supporting India's candidacy. No, that's the only thing that matters. You can make joint statements and all that. It means nothing. It has to be in the UN. Because they do not want a peer competitor, because they have privileges that they don't want to share with another. They don't want to open the door to another country. Neither the US, nor Russia, nor Britain, nor France, nor China. None of them. China publicly opposes India, the other four don't. So, in fact, when China took Kashmir to the United Nations after the internal reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir on 5th of August 2019, what happened? Britain supported China. That is a kind of duplicity in British policy towards India. India, yes, but Pakistan also, that kind of thing. India is a solid partner, but oh yeah, Pakistan and Taliban, yes, we have to talk to the Taliban. They're not good Taliban or bad Taliban. They're just Taliban. They're there. Let's talk to them. India says the Taliban is a threat to India. So we are talking to them now, of course. So these are the things. Then the review lists India as a consequential power. But as I said, the US is Britain's most important strategic ally under the review, quote unquote. And India comes nowhere near. In fact, Robin Niblett, the director of the influential Chatham House, 27 minutes, I still have some more time, says, quote, if American primacy and sustenance of political and economic structures that support that goal is what the US and key allies seek, why should it trust India, given New Delhi's uncertain commitment, if not downright aversion to that project? This created a furor in India, but he's speaking the truth, because our interests are not aligned certainly, perhaps they are even opposed in some ways. Furthermore, India's interests rarely align with those of smaller, more economically developed democracies, Niblett says. He clubs India with famous company. You know who is the famous company? China. He says, and another famous company, Saudi Arabia, and another one, Turkey. Our relations with Turkey are very, very, they're not great for various reasons. With Saudi Arabia, they're very good, but not with Turkey. So India is clubbed. India is the distinguished company of China, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey as quote unquote rivals, or at best awkward counterparts. This is what the British think about mainstream Chatham House, the most influential think tank of that country, apart from the IISS London, International Institute for Strategic Studies. That's what they really think about India. And they yet talk about a special relationship with India. आप हमारे खास दोस्त हो, बोरिस जॉनसन साहब जब आए अप्रैल में, उन्होंने मोदी जी को कहा है, नरेंद्र, आप मेरे खास दोस्त हो. Something like that. I'm just making it up, but he used khas dost. He said it. And Narendra Modi, our Prime Minister, said he has done a lot to modernize the relationship, and he has. And I'll come to that later. So, during the G7 summit, they want to transform the G7 into a D10, Democracy 10. Bharat ko le lo, Gantantra hai Bharat ka, Mahan desh hai. Bharat ko le lo, theek, acha hai. अगर आपको चाइना फेसिंग कैपेबिलिटीज बनानी है, that's the goal of the G7. Why India was invited? China is not invited. China is in the G20, not in the G7. Because if you want to do D10, China doesn't qualify, Russia doesn't qualify because they're not democracy. But do you want to talk ideologically about democracy? If you want to really have China facing capabilities, should you be leaving out the Gulf monarchies, who may be willing to partner you because they're also concerned about the rise of China, like the UAE, like Saudi Arabia and others. And Russia even. Russia has a what is called a no limits partnership, according to the joint statement signed at the Winter Olympics in Beijing. No limits, quote unquote. Koi had nahi hai. And now they may be regretting it, but China has them by the scruff of the neck because Russia is a declining power. India is a much stronger power, except that we are not on the Security Council and we do not have the capacity to make fighter aircraft and military technology, strategic capability to the extent they have. But in all other indicators, we are much stronger than Russia today. How many of you know that? Russia's economy is much smaller than India's. India's $3.2 trillion today. $3.2 trillion. So the world is, as I said, not what it appears to be. The world is as it is. And let's understand that world. And let's deal with it for India's benefit. So, non-democratic states, Vietnam, Iran, Gulf monarchies, they are very strong partners of India. We have very strong relations, but complicated relations also with Iran. With the Gulf monarchies, we have excellent relations. The UAE is one of our strongest strategic partners today. We have a lot of congruence in the view we take of the world. So these are the paradoxes. You know, you could say there is an intersection between paradoxes and differences, right? Differences as paradoxes and paradoxes as differences. Does that make sense? We have some difference in orientation. I'm talking philosophy. Even I don't understand what I'm saying, but that's okay. I never understand what I'm saying anyway. So the point is, vaccines, खास दोस्त, भारत में आ गए, ये कर दिया, वो कर दिया, बहुत मजा आ गया यार. What happened? What happened? आपने Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, I spoke on Sansad TV on this. मैंने कहा कि Covishield, you call it Covishield, more than $1 billion doses we made for the world. It was exported to many countries. It was good enough for them. It was exported to Britain. And the NHS system, and Mr. Boris Johnson said, I have taken the jab, Narendra. I've also taken the jab, meaning the Covishield vaccine, which is AstraZeneca, right? But after you refuse to recognize the Covishield certificate. And there was a big fight about that. And Harshvardhan Shringla, my great friend, the foreign secretary, he summoned the British ambassador, said this is discriminatory and we will take reciprocal measures. अगर आप Covishield ko nahi manenge. Isn't it a paradox? Supreme irony. The Covishield is a British vaccine, exactly the same according to the doctors as Oxford AstraZeneca. The whole world is taking it. You are not banning people, Bangladeshi, even it's very funny, or Nigerian who's taken the Covishield vaccine. That certificate is okay. But the Covishield vaccine taken by Indians in India, they're not allowed entry to Britain. Here's another paradox. It was strange. So why does it have a different reaction on Indians in India than on Bangladeshis in Bangladesh? I asked this question rhetorically on Sansad TV. Or in the British climate, is it better? And the doctor started laughing next to me. They said, no, sir, it's exactly the same. And Boris Johnson said, I have taken the jab. So, that's how it is. The world is as it is. This shows a very patronizing attitude, an attitude based on supremacist thinking, based on the past conquest of India, period. Interventions in domestic politics. Dominic Raab, when he was the foreign secretary, he once said, but he was asked a question about why Kashmir is discussed, why farmers' protests are discussed in the British Parliament, India's domestic matters, and so on and so forth. He said, but your politics is also our politics. Now, what he meant was the Mirpuris, the Pakistani origin Britons, and others, they are the vote banks for British politicians. So your politics in India is our politics. Simple. And he spoke the truth. I'm so glad that he was very truthful. But that doesn't help our relationship with Britain because it creates lots of irritants in the relationship. And they never want to talk about it. It's only we who talk about it. You never read in the Guardian newspaper, I read regularly, in the Times, in the Spectator, they never talk about British debates in Parliament. They are serenely self-righteous and serenely superior. Oh, it's our business. We rule this country and its empire. So we have an interest in talking about these matters. हमें तो बोलना पड़ेगा, हम तो वहां थे, ये तो हमारा है. It's our right. They feel very entitled about these things, this politics. So if you want to have a modern relationship with this country, you have to get over all this. And Boris Johnson he's done a lot, really. I admire him. Because he is a Briton who comes from, he's not elite, cream de la creme. Like David Cameron was Oxbridge. Boris Johnson is not Oxbridge. He is by education, but not by his politics. So farmers' agitation. You are throwing projectiles at the Indian High Commission when Ruchi Ghanshyam, my batchmate, was the High Commissioner in London. They allowed these protests to take place and people to try and smash their way into the Indian High Commission in August, September 2019, after the internal reorganization in Kashmir, right? Now, our former chief of protocol said, if our ministry is smart, they will have such counter protests and, try to break into the British High Commission or take out some of their properties in Delhi. They'll come to their senses. Yeah, it's about power. And then say, oh, no, we can't do that because the judges and the courts, and we are a free country, and they'll say that we are oppressing non-violent protests. Where's the non-violent protests? But it happened. So this is a very complicated thing. And Priti Patel, the Indian origin Home Secretary, she did nothing when these attacks took place, vandalization of the Indian High Commission took place in London. So these are the problems. Now, what's happening now? Let's come to that. We had the virtual summit in May 2021. Okay, I have about 7 minutes more. Yeah, 7 minutes.
They're listening to you.
My lovely lecture. What a lovely day. What a lovely relationship. What a lovely world. I love that. So, at the virtual summit, okay, what happened? Boris Johnson, remember, is a politician. Our politics, your politics is also our politics. So what did he say? He spoke to the Guardian newspaper, he spoke to the Times. He said, I've secured this deal with the Indians. 6,000 to 6,500 British jobs, more than 533 million pounds or $739 million of new Indian investments, and 446 million British pounds in new export deals, and 400 British jobs from these export deals. Wow. He was trying to win votes in Britain. That I have got this deal from the Indians. The Indian readout was very, very subdued because we got very little from that. I don't think we negotiated very well. The only thing we got was 3,000 skilled workers, that means IT and others, will have access every year to Britain without labor market tests. That means they won't be quizzed and questioned about their capabilities. They'll just automatically enter. They have to take. Because this has been our demand for a long time. Because there are visa bans, difficulties, and also post-study visas. You know, students, you know that. Post-study visas. My son studied in a British university. The policy that time was that you have to leave. You cannot apply for a job or work after your study. He did a master's in University of London, University College London, and earlier in Leicester. So he left, and after that, they changed the policy. You could work for a couple of years. Now, that is also a demand which they have conceded. Now, if you want a relationship with India that's a strategic relationship happens between partners in the real world when there is a congruence of interests. You can't just talk about a strategic partnership just out of the blue. You have to have a basis for that relationship on the ground for it to happen. So what India got was this 3,000 skilled workers, but there was a catch. We were compelled to accept undocumented Indians from Britain back in India, you know, the so-called illegals. So it was not a very good negotiation from India's point of view. Now, we are the 15th largest training partner, underwhelming in 2021. We account for only 1.7% of Britain's global trade. Britain is a great global trading power, great financial powerhouse. We are nowhere near. And they're talking about an enhanced trade partnership by 2030. FTA negotiations have started. India does not have a proper appetite for FTAs, as you know, at least the Modi government, though we have concluded one with Australia and with the UAE recently, but we walked out of the RCEP because we thought that China will dominate that. So these are the paradoxes. Will it ease entry of students and skilled workers? The new the enhanced trade partnership that was announced after the virtual summit. Will India lower tariffs? We also have higher tariffs. Will the British allow agricultural exports from India, as has been our demand, etc.? Big questions. I don't have any good answers to that. Now, the final paradox, which you listed, ma'am, is, there are, I begin with the two most important paradoxes, begin and end, that is. I began with the paradox of history, the reading of history or the readout of history, the history of British colonial rule. Now, the final paradox is the paradox of power. And all politics is about power. And all international relations is a struggle for power, as Hans Moggetto said, as the realists say today, as Dr. Kissinger says, the great man, Henry Kissinger. John Mearsheimer, University of Chicago, the great realist. So, look, your GDP per capita is today, in 2021, 2,274 US dollars, your India's GDP per capita. It went down to about $1,900 during the first year of COVID. Now it's revived. Britain's GDP is $42,334. Yours is $2,200. My God. 21 times? Right? Are you equal? Think about it. You may be a large economy because you are a continental sized country, but Britain per capita is 22 times more productive than India. India is nowhere. So that is the greatest paradox. And it is the paradox of hard power, as you say. Thus, Robin Niblett, the director of Chatham House, when he said that India is an awkward partner, he was right. That the relationship between smaller developed democracies and a continental size underdeveloped country like India is awkward. And it is awkward. So these are the challenges before the relationship. So what could happen in future? I'm not a crystal gazer, but let's talk about it. Britain is a P5 member, world's fifth largest economy. With 28.28 billion, it was the sixth largest investor in India between 2000 and 2020. It has 99 Nobel laureates. India has about, who are Indian, Rabindranath Tagore, Amartya Sen, and C.V. Raman, who are Indian citizens. The others of Indian origin, Hargobind Khurana, Chandrasekhar, they're not Indian. I think we have 3 Nobel laureates, am I right, am I wrong? Who are Indian citizens, only 3, they have 99. The second highest number globally. They are 4th in the Global Innovation Index. 11.5% of global foreign listed companies are listed on the London Stock Exchange. They have a seat on every major multilateral organization and a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. We don't even have a non-permanent regular seat. We are elected from time to time. The third ranked global soft power, the world's third most powerful cyber nation, with the world's 4th largest diplomatic network. We are pathetic. We have 900 to 1,000 diplomats, proper diplomats, properly trained, what I call the Indian Foreign Service. We are pathetic. And the third highest destination for private technology investment. India comes nowhere near, but India has certain strengths also and growing. And what are these? Your GDP is $3.17 trillion. You are the 6th largest economy. Britain is the 5th largest economy, even if the per capita GDP is 20 times higher in Britain. From 7.09% in 2019, India's share of the world GDP will likely be 7.97% in 2019. And according to a chap called Guardia, who wrote in this excellent forum called Politico, read politico.com, the magazine. It's a European view of the world. It's fantastic. This is a European forum, right? Read Politico. It gives you a lot of excellent perspectives of the world from a European point. Politico has assessed based on real-time data and future projections, World Bank, IMF, everybody, that in the year 2011, when my great-great-great-grandchildren will be jumping around, in the year 2100, the world's #1 economy will be India, 20%. #2 will be China, 18%. #3 will be the United States, 10%, and Europe will be nowhere near. Now, this sounds like a very pleasant fantasy. I hope it's just very pleasant and not a fantasy for future generations. Your great-grandchildren will be jumping around with joy if that happens. But our nation has the potential and we are getting there. So, therefore, Military expenditure has grown from 1.51% in 1980 and 20 odd million dollars in 1947, India's military expenditure, to 3.81% of the world in 2019. 5 million British Indians, only 1.8% of the population contribute 6% of Britain's GDP. So India has many strengths. I can go on and on. But let's stop here. What I'm saying is the future of the relationship can be based on the merits and the strengths of the two countries, including the growing strength of India. Then it can be a more symmetrical, more balanced, more proper, and more strategically truly aligned relationship. I call it not love, but mutual attraction. That's where it all starts, doesn't it? Right? So they are still not ready to accept our claims on reparations, but there is some introspection. I quote there is an introspection. I quote George Osborne in The Guardian, the former British Chancellor. Quote, there is a whole string of British governments who think there is a special relationship with India. My experience as the Chancellor is that the Indians do not have that view of Britain. I've already said that. For a British senior politician to acknowledge that, it means there is a change in the way they think India. That's what I'm saying. So that becomes a part of a process which will lead to a genuine reconciliation in the future. As I said, a truth and reconciliation commission, as Mandela said in South Africa. Truth, reconciliation has to begin with acceptance of truth, good or bad. That's what. Now, Johnson, I have already spoken about, Ukraine. He showed great understanding of Ukraine when he was in Delhi in April. The US has shown great understanding of India's stand on Ukraine and compulsions, because they say India depends on Russia strategically, but we are willing to partner India. Now, that's the kind of partnership India wants, because Russians have become dodgy for us because of China. Russia is not the same force. So they're calling us an indispensable partner. They want a modern relationship. So do we, because they are technologically far more sophisticated, financially far stronger, as the world's financial capital, London, for example. So the UK's carrier strike group, the tri-services exercise between UK and Indian forces, all these things are now happening. They never happened before. Before it was all talk about the romance of history and all that. Oh, old chap, how are you, and all that stuff. It is all about nostalgia. Now it's about hard reality. It's about hard power. The UK is sending a liaison officer to India's Information Fusion Center. There is a first-time maritime dialogue. There are technology and IP transfers being talked about, sharing intelligence. I heard these remarks from Liz Truss. Liz Truss is the UK foreign minister. I was invited on the 31st of March in the Moria Hotel. When she was visiting India. She says, we are willing to work with India. These are all new things. The joint statement during Johnson's visit talks about breathtaking things. Joint research, co-design, co-development, joint production of defense technology, modern fighter aircraft, jet engine, advanced core technology, blah, blah, blah. Now, this is something what India needs, because we have to build China-facing capabilities, because Russia is a partner of uncertain reliability because of Chinese pressure on Russia. Though they don't like the Chinese, but because tremendous pressure. So we have to diversify. So such ambition could help strengthen the wrinkles in the relationship. Now, Patrick Wintour, the diplomatic editor of the Guardian newspaper, whom I read often, he's beautiful, he writes brilliantly. Read British newspapers to improve language. They're great. It's the mother country. He writes, quote unquote, India is a rising superpower that the British simply dare not alienate. Now, that's not patronizing. That's a kind of recognition of India's hard power. That's a big change in the way they think about India. And that's where I'm going to end this lecture. by saying that there's a beautiful piece of writing by Walter Ladwig in another think tank, not in Chatham House, but in Rusi. He says, the UK may not be India's #1 partner for trade, defense, hardware, or political cooperation, but it is one of the few countries that ticks all the boxes. So Britain is important for India. We don't need to just reflexively be nationalistic and jingoistic. There's no need. We can have reconciliation. Why not? And we should. So the big if is, if they remain in denial of colonial depredations, then it's going to be complicated and these differences are not going to dissolve. Narrowly defined national pride has to give way to a more confident assertion of British patriotism that celebrates modern ties to India as shared destiny in an increasingly interconnected world. And a recognition of the new India. Turbulence arising from cultural differences can be controlled, but strategic turbulence is far more difficult to control. Some Indians prefer a modest and pragmatic relationship, but here also history and sentiment comes in the way. Something between, in my view, altruism and purely transactional relationship might be a way forward. With mutual respect as key, and hard power and hard gains and assessments thereof as the drivers of the relationship. Structural problems do not get resolved by commentary and papers and joint statements and resets and tales. Unreachable ambition is not the answer, because words are never deals. Because reaching common ground on issues troubling India should be the foremost concern as far as we in India is concerned. We have to think India, we have to think ourselves, because the world, as I said, is as it is. Thank you very much. And now I'm happy to take questions, but first I'll have some water.
Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to the students and scholars who are here with us offline and via Zoom. And I'm really confident that this session has benefited from this wonderful presentation. We're also very grateful to you friends that are sincere request and join us for today. So before we close the session, I'm opening the session for discussion. I'm opening the floor for discussion. Any question? Okay.
Just tell your names, please. Yes.
Yes. So
We can.
sir, I hope you don't mind us asking questions the way you are also discussing your board.
I don't mind. I just love it.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much, sir. I just wanted to have your opinion regarding should India continue being a member of Commonwealth nations, and the amount of celebration, particularly we sort of take up when it's about winning a medal in Commonwealth Games. So that's my question, and I will read out one more question if you're fine with that. So this is from Dr. Sharma. So I was there. When every country is trying to forge strong relationship with India, and there are organizations like BRICS, Quad, G4, and G20, where India has strong presence as member country. They may have strong bilateral relationship, but why UK is missing from forging any such partnership with India?
Okay, the Commonwealth, I used to deal with Commonwealth in London, and what an issue, the resolution of which takes 5 minutes, bilateral discussion, it takes about 5 days in the Commonwealth. In other words, it talks about talks. It was a talking shop. Yet, you could argue that the Commonwealth is useful because I'm not a great multilateralist at all. I believe that our bilateral relationships are far more important than our interactions in the United Nations, even with different countries. But what multilateral organizations do is that they give you a chance for a separate bilateral interaction with your counterparts from other countries. Meaning, if the Indian foreign minister is in London for a Commonwealth meeting, he is going to meet the foreign ministers of X, Y, and Z countries, not in the Commonwealth, but separately. So that becomes a kind of a logistically easy way to get more benefit and more value in terms of time, in terms of cost, in terms of travel. In that way, the Commonwealth is important as all international organizations. But I agree with you that India doesn't take the Commonwealth very seriously. Our prime ministers perhaps don't even attend Commonwealth summits anymore, but we do not write it off. It was more useful in the past when India had less hard power, but it's been overtaken by events. But it does no harm because the financial commitment is not huge also. And look, if you want to really transform the relationship with the British, for them, the Commonwealth is very important because of the empire and because of history, nostalgia. Humor them, charm them, just be there, hold their hand. It doesn't do us any harm. As long as they give us the jet engine. Now, coming to G4, G20, honestly, the G20 has perhaps lost a lot of its relevance. The G4, I was in Portugal when I was instructed by the Ministry of External Affairs, Delhi, that there was what is called an agreed document which became the basis for further negotiations on UN Security Council reforms. The G4 is India, Brazil, Germany, and Japan, who want to become permanent members of the UN Security Council. So they have tried to evolve a common position. Now, there was tremendous opposition from the P5, as I mentioned, and from others. The Africans don't want it because an African country is not there. Pakistanis don't want it because India is there. Italy doesn't want it because Germany is there. You know, and China doesn't want it because Japan is there, because of his historical animosity. So it took about, when you negotiate in the UN, you negotiate on the basis of an agreed document. It becomes the paper that will be the basis for the negotiations of reform. So that paper is the only thing that has been agreed, as far as I know, even today, for negotiation of UN Security Council reform. So I was asked to make a joint démarche, a representation to the Portuguese Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the ambassadors of Brazil, India, Japan, and Germany. The four of us went together to discuss it. And one of the things in that paper was the veto power. The big question is the veto power. So the G4 were willing to freeze the veto power for, I think, 10 or 15 years. No veto power. And after that, it will be reviewed as perhaps a basis to get agreement from the US, Russia, China, France, Britain. See, the veto power is very important because world peace is all that is fine, but you want to solve a problem in any part of the world. The Security Council has chapter 7, I think. Under chapter 7 or chapter 3, which one, I'm not sure. You can research it. In one of the chapters authorizes the Security Council to use force. For example, the Security Council passed resolutions on Kashmir, right, in 1947-48, but those were not under that chapter. They were not binding. Meaning that those decisions were just guidance. But there are under a certain chapter, decisions are binding. Now, but even there, any of the 5 permanent members, if it vetoes that, then it's not binding. It's binding only when the P5 all five agree on that. So there are very few cases, but very few cases where such resolutions have been acted upon, and the use of force has been authorized by the UN Security Council. Now, the G20, G4, the Britain. So my view is that the only way it's really going to work with Britain is bilateral. So multilateral forums are not going to help us with any country. I am a multilateralist skeptic, because we live in this big bad world, Hobbesian world, where nation states are about power and conflict, and ultimately, and even the structure of the UN is that. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Bibhakar from Pratyush. My question is, many Indian firms like Tata, etc., had invested heavily in the British as a gateway to Europe. So then there was Brexit in January 2020. So Indian companies hope that Britain would retain a custom union with the EU, but it didn't. So, sir, how has that impacted Indian companies? About 900 of them that had invested in.
I don't have a good answer because I haven't researched it. I don't have an answer, but in general, I'll say that Brexit and the consequences of Brexit is still work in progress. Nobody knows where Britain is going. Now, the British are very keen to conclude a FTA with India because of Brexit, because they want new partnerships outside Europe to compensate for the loss of business within Europe as a consequence of Brexit. So India becomes important, China becomes important, others become important in that context. As far as Indian companies are concerned, I don't think it has a significant impact. I don't think so, because again, as I said, it's bilateral. Indian companies are in Britain because there's money to be made, not because there is Brexit or not Brexit. Right. Yes, sir.
Hello, sir. My name is Ishrat. I'm from Political Science. I just wanted to know, like, we all are aware about the unjust treatment when my British church.
Little louder, please.
Like, I just wanted to know not the unjust treatment.
Mic closer. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to know that all the unjust treatment done by the Britishers on us, we all are aware about. I just wanted to know that what will be the situation now if we were never ruled by Britishers? What will be their relation?
There's a serial called directed by Robert Zemeckis, Back to the Future. I recommend you watch it because Marty McFly goes back and forth, and his mother falls in love with him because she doesn't know he's her son, and she's kind of getting closer and closer, and he's getting, that's my answer. It's pointless going to the past of what might have happened or what didn't happen. It serves no useful purpose. We just have to deal with what happened, not what might have happened. Because is it going to change our fate, the present or the future? No. Right.
So from my side, I'm here.
Yeah, please. I'm here.
So my question is, how do you think this paradox that we have talked about between India and UK has implications for India's diplomatic relations with UK? Or, I mean, do you come across any such experience that you can share?
Yes, I think it's a work in progress. As I said that this relationship can only move forward if there is a genuine rethink in public opinion in Britain, not just among the intellectuals. I've quoted the intellectuals, the leaders. They are changing in the way they think India, but it has to be across the board. In other words, you have to write about the famines. You have to teach British school children about the horrible things that British colonial rulers did in India. It has to be at a much more structural at a deeper, at a level of true knowledge and reconciliation, truth and reconciliation. Now, if this relationship has to move forward, I think that's a required condition. Now, as far as reparations are concerned, that's a different issue. So Sashi Tharoor said that just apologize and give a token £1 a year as reparations. That's enough. But apologize.
But with the global politics changing rapidly over the years, and India becoming a rising nation now, also a leading power, because we come across a lot of comments by Prime Minister Modi also that India is no longer a kind of passive country, the way it used to respond to global politics like Cold War period and all. So, and also India, becoming vocal about its soft power diplomacy, and with this yoga and discourse coming in, do you see any change in perspective or the treatment that this colonial regime had towards us now? Is there any change and somehow they treat them at this at par?
At the level of the elites, the change is faster, as I said, and then at the level of ordinary people. I'm saying that it has to be across the board. It has to be at all levels for the relationship to really get momentum. But then the problem will resolve itself in a way when India's hard power attributes, indicators improve as they are improving now. GDP, India on the military power index. Things
Is it
like
possible? Is it impossibility of India becoming hard power? I don't think
India is a hard power.
so.
It is not possible. It's a reality. But India is a great paradox. Like, as I said, just as the relationship, we have the most sophisticated satellites and rockets.
Does it make it hard for like USA or like because I don't it is against its own Indian principle of this cultural agreement. It doesn't like to attack any country. It goes against its own goals.
No,
It believes in peace and coexistence.
yeah, that's okay. That's what we talk about. We also did expeditions to Southeast Asia, the Cholas. It's not helpful to build mythologies. Mythologies help you at a certain time of your history when you're weak. But India's greatest empire, as I keep telling young people, empirically proven, is not the Mughals, it's the Mauryas. The greatest empire in terms of expanse of land, Eastern Iran, swaths of Eastern Iran were part of the Mauryan Empire. Now, so India was at its expansive west or west, whatever you call it, but not just east but west. And the research has not been done into India's forays into Southeast Asia. During the so-called classical age, the Hindu and Buddhist period, most of the kings had part Indian blood, if not full Indian blood in Southeast Asia. Most of them were merchants or Brahmins or whatever. You marry a local princess and then, and you bring in the philosophy, the religion, not religion, the philosophy, way of life, whatever. Something like the Turks and the Afghans who came to India, they become Indianized. The British didn't, they preferred to leave. They were separate and superior. But the Islamic invasions, right from the Arabs, the Indian genes are ancestral North Indian, ancestral South Indian broadly, but we are all ancestral North Indian and all ancestral South Indian. We are a mix of different things, right? And so we Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, right up to Myanmar. So the hard part, what I mean that is, it's okay, Vishwa Guru. Your economic strength is a very important component of your hard power. It doesn't have to be, hard power is not military power. That's what I'm trying to say. I look at it in a more broader, in a more holistic way. And that's happening. And if India is moving, we are chugging along at 6% compounded growth. If we continue like that for another 50 years, we will be at least number 2. But we were number 1 for most of human history, or number 2. So what's the big deal? It's not the rise of India, as the West likes to think, and they are very scared of it. The rise of India, rise of China. It is, I would call it the restoration of India, not the rise of India, because it's not a big deal. For me as an Indian, 25% of the world GDP is a given the size of the country. Yeah.
So my name is Ashwin. Now I want to ask you one question that you're talking about bilateral trade agreements between two nations that are tied up with the strong bonding between the two nations.
Exactly.
Then right now, it is like India is having the marketing system in UK that is at #1 position, and UK's marketing in India is right now at 18th position. So how is it that we can tell about bilateral trade agreements between two nations?
Bilateral trade agreements are basically not about creating an exact symmetry, but they are about market access and mutual advantage. So bilateral trade agreements are, tariffs. They are about tariffs. You reduce or remove tariffs on certain kinds of things that you are not getting access into the other market because of their high tariffs. Also non-tariff barriers, like human rights is a non-tariff barrier according to the Europeans, the EU, we spoke about it, Dr. Manasi. The human rights is a very, I would say it is a very dodgy, tricky tool used by Europeans against India. They don't use it against China because China is more powerful than India, but they use it against us. Your children are making shoes, Nike shoes, we won't buy your shoes. That's an excuse. That's because they don't want your products to be there. So they find an excuse. It's a non-tariff barrier, but there are tariff barriers. So it doesn't mean that the trade will be equal. It means that, okay, you allow access for X, Y, Z from my economy to yours, and I will allow ABC from yours to mine. Roughly, that's what it is. Yeah. After, okay, after you, after him.
Afternoon, sir. My name is Sinha. I wanted to ask you that, sir, what would be the change in approach of Britain when Rishi Sunak is currently a strong candidate to become the Prime Minister of Britain? What will be the change of approach towards India by Britain? And sir, can you reflect upon how is this guy being an Indian getting such support, popular support in Britain?
It shows the genuine change that I'm talking about. But that's at the level of the elites, as I say. The change in thinking about India. The fact that a brown person whose skin tone is brown, not white, can potentially become the prime minister of that country. It shows something great about that country, doesn't it? But does it help India? No. He's there to help Britain. Why would he help India? If India gets some help in the process, that's good. But his primary job is to take care of the interests of his country. So it's not going to have any impact on relations with India for better or for worse. What I'm saying is that whether Boris Johnson is the prime minister or Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss or anybody else, it doesn't matter. Because the relationship, for better or for worse, is guided by the structural challenges it faces that we have talked about already. It doesn't matter who is the prime minister, honestly. But it does make a difference to the kind of society Britain is going to become. More inclusive, more tolerant, more kind of color. And therefore, more willing to retrospect about the negative aspects of British colonialism, as I said. So that kind of introspection is good. In that way, it will help India. But Rishi Sunak as an individual, no. And some of them are trying to be more British than, if they were white, because they have to prove themselves. It's a misfortune for our Muslims, for example. I say, Sarkari Musliman, they have to prove even more that they are Indian. Why? Why do they have to prove that? You are Indian, period. But you have to because there is a kind of a cultural issue surrounding your religion. because of Pakistan, because that has vitiated and poisoned relationships between Hindus and Muslims in India. And as long as Pakistan is there, I don't see a solution. Unless there is a truth and reconciliation, as I said. Unless there is an acknowledgement that what Ghazni did was wrong. And this is what happened. But let's move on. It's happened, it's finished, let's move on, build a great India. That's what I talk about always. In this very toxic, what's happening in the social media and all that stuff. But it won't matter, the British society will change, and it is already changing. And the conservatives have much better relations with India, actually, than the Labour ever did. The Labour always, at one time, was pro-India during independence, its movement, and later. But then they got the Kashmir issue into it, as I said, Dominic Raab, the former Foreign Secretary, he said, your politics is also our politics. So we have to talk Kashmir because of the Mir Puris and the Pakistanis. These chaps make much more noise than British Indians. British Indians are quieter, they are more sophisticated, they're better educated, but these are the street fighters and they're the ones who vote. So you have to win their vote to get elected, and they are a significant minority. So in that way, the internal debate within British society is being reshaped, and our move, I would say there is genuine movement forward with the Conservatives. They are much better than the Labour governments have been in the past. For India, for ties with India. And that's why there are 6 or 7 Indian origin ministers in this government. Patel, Preeti Patel, Sunak was there, and there are others. Indian origin or Pakistani origin. I'm saying subcontinental origin. So that's good. That's great. Javed, Sajid Javed is another one, and others. Yeah. First him, and then you. He's been waiting. Oh, I am delighted to hear that. We can go on. I have no problem. I'm enjoying it. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Harshadwan from College. I want to ask, we generally say British broke India economically, politically, socially. But we need to agree on the fact if British do not consolidate India with their ICS, railway, and postal policies, India may be divided into many princely states. Also, when British missionary came to India, they sold the evil picture of us like Sati Pradha and all. And our orientalistic and middle class intelligence that emerged on that period, that was done with the help of British only, and with their help only we have.
I got your question. What you're saying that they also did a lot of good to unite India. As I said, I will not comment on what might have happened to India if the British had not come, because that's Back to the Future. Robert Zemeckis, Marty McFly. I don't know whether you have seen that. Please see it, Back to the Future. It's fantastic. It's very fun. It's about the time travel, back yesterday, today, tomorrow. Kal, aaj aur kal. And his mother has a crush on him. So it's really weird. So I won't comment on that. But I'd like to ask a question. Did the British ever say, they said that we gave you this, or we gave you that. The railways were designed to transport British strategic assets from one corner of India to another corner of India. Troops, if there's a revolt, economic merchandise, to transport the raw materials of India to the ports to be looted out of India. So what you call the unity of India and the integration of India, it happened, but that happened as a byproduct of a project whose aims were entirely different, not to unite India. If your aim is to unite India, how come you have Pakistan? Can you resolve that question, that dilemma? Winston Churchill said almost like a wish list that this is a beastly country, beastly people, the Hindus are beastly, they're this, they're that. He used all kinds of views and he committed genocide. This man committed genocide. He's a British hero, but he's not a hero for me, certainly. Now, he said all that, and he said that India will collapse after we leave. It'll collapse into this and that. India did not collapse. The Canadian journalist Wallace Hangen, he wrote a book called After Nehru Who? That's a wrong kind of question. After Nehru, somebody, whoever, how does it matter? Somebody will come. So I don't agree with the premise of your question because all this was designed for the benefit of the empire. The intention was not the benefit of the people of India. Yes, sir.
My name is Pratyush, and I'm not a student of.
You are the professor.
Yeah, but I am not a student of international relations or political science. So my question might sound like to everyone here. But
Are you the professor or the student?
yes, I am a student of.
We spoke in the morning, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So my question is, it's basically a philosophy. Can you call yourself as a multilateral skeptic?
Yes.
So far, I have been reading the newspapers and the way the multilateral organizations are doing, whether it is European Union or ASEAN or whether it is sometimes so many other multilateral groups. So I see that multilateral organizations have a lot of scope in terms of countries coming together and doing well for the people. Whereas in comparison to the bilateral groups. So I just want you to.
Okay, I got it. Let me give you a perspective from what I know and what I've seen. European Union. I could drive literally in my personal car, not in my official car, in my personal car, across the border from Portugal to Spain or to France in the north or to any EU country beyond because of the common, the immigration rules were all simplified and free movement was allowed. The currency. The Portuguese hate the EU, what's it called? The EU currency, the euro. They hate the euro. They say, it was much better when we had our own currency. They were destroyed by the euro, they say. Because you have these artificial standards. You know about purchasing power parity? Your own currency's capacity to buy goods and services in your own country, as opposed to an artificially determined exchange rate between the dollar and that currency. A dollar's value, roughly what it means is a dollar's purchasing power within the US in terms of what it can buy, and 80 rupees, which is the equivalent of the dollar, what it can buy in India are not the same. You can buy much more in India for 80 rupees than you can buy for US dollars, one in the US. That's what it means. So this is the argument. Now, the EU project is today a project that they're wobbling. They thought of currency union. Now they are backtracking. They are backtracking on everything. They're becoming more closed. They are against refugees. They're becoming xenophobic. Nationalism is reasserting itself. And look at the Ukraine crisis. We can go on discussing that. The Ukraine crisis is a show of opportunism by the West against perceived Russian expansion. The actual truth is the other way around. It's the NATO expansion that has led to the Russian backlash, according to me. You may agree or disagree, but that's also the Indian government doesn't take a view on this, but I take a view based on realism. Russia has always been troubled by invasions from the West, whether it was Hitler, whether it was Napoleon. They're terrified of that, just as we are terrified of invasions from what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan. We are terrified. Historically, we have faced so much of destructive power coming from the northwest. We could not deal with it. And we were run over many times. We couldn't deal with it. So the EU is dysfunctional. Now, SAFTA. I haven't heard the word SAFTA in the last 10 years. We kind of almost forgot about it. Even SARC, no one has talked about. SARC is dysfunctional because SARC cannot agree. Basically, India objects to Pakistan as long as terrorism is being sponsored by Pakistan. But the real reason India objects is Pakistan never allowed SARC to evolve into a proper trading group. Pakistan never gave most favored nation status to India. Even India has withdrawn it now as retaliation. So the movement of goods and services is an essential condition to realize the SARC project. It never happened. So this government in India, even the previous government, they decided we will ignore SARC and we will start BIMSTEC and other things. So it's kind of you have sidestepped away from SARC. ASEAN, today ASEAN doesn't know what it is. ASEAN, everybody is talking about ASEAN centrality. Oh, really? ASEAN centrality in what? In the security architecture of Southeast Asia, really? Because there is a great reluctance. ASEAN countries are very opportunistic. On the one hand, they don't like the Chinese and they don't like the rise of China and Chinese aggression. Every country in ASEAN almost is facing Chinese aggression, territorial aggression. I'm talking about the South China Sea and the disputes surrounding that. Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Philippines, name it. They have the so-called 9-dash line. But nobody is willing or able to work out a joint strategy to deal with the rise of China or to form coalitions. So you bandwagon with China. 3 countries have done that. Laos, Cambodia, Malaysia is sitting on the fence, Thailand to some extent. But the countries that are opposing that, the foremost is Vietnam and the Philippines. Indonesia doesn't bandwagon, but it sits on the fence. Where is your ASEAN centrality? So I'm trying to give a rebuttal of this argument that multilateral organizations are the great and glorious thing happening in international affairs, because hard power and its expression or exercise and the instrument through which it is exercised is still the nation state.
So, thank you so much.
There was some other question?
Time, I think we may not be able to take more
Last question, anyone else? Last question. No? Okay. You have the last one.
Short of time.
Okay.
But we will send those questions to you if you please help us.
I will, but I'll help you next week.
Yes.
Because I have some writing deadline this week.
I would definitely love to hear you more, but it is a positive time. We are not able to take more questions. I'm sorry for that. So at the end, I would like to extend my gratitude to you again for speaking to us and enlightening us with your vast knowledge and erudite discussion. And we really look forward to have more such interactions with you, sir. Before we conclude this session, I would also like to thank our participants for being such a wonderful and interactive audience. Thank you so much. Now, we will start our next session in 5 or 10 minutes. Okay. So before we go on, I would request to have a group picture with sir here. So all of you please accommodate and then we will leave and you carry on with the next session. 5 minutes. We will start the session in 5 minutes, not more than that. Okay, ma'am, if you're okay with it, so can you please